She married a millionaire for his money, but the outcome took her by surprise. Mary stood in front of the lawyer's desk, her heart pounding with anticipation. She had played her role well, offering Marcel the illusion of love, tending to his needs just enough to keep up appearances. When she realized her efforts had actually improved his health, she quickly changed her strategy, ensuring that his final days were as miserable as possible, and now, finally, he was gone. She had won, or so she thought. The lawyer, a stern man with silver-rimmed glasses, cleared his throat and unfolded Marcel's will. Before we proceed, I must inform you that Mr. Marcel and made some significant changes to his testament shortly before his passing. Mary smirked, confident that she remained the sole beneficiary. But as the lawyer continued, her smugness slowly turned to dread. To my beloved wife, Mary, the lawyer read aloud, I leave you exactly what you gave me, nothing. The room spun, Mary's breath hitched. What? That's impossible. I was his wife, his only wife. The lawyer adjusted his glasses, unfazed by her outburst. Mr. Dotton suspected your true intentions, Mrs. N. He saw the way your care wavered, the way your kindness faded the moment you thought he was recovering. He realized that the love you professed was merely a transaction. Mary's fingers gripped the arms of the chair as a cold sweat formed on her brow. But he needed me. He had no one else. The lawyer continued as if he hadn't heard her. Therefore, in a final act of irony, Mr. N has left his entire fortune to someone who truly cared for him, a young nurse by the name of Sophie Laurent. Mary's mouth fell open. Who? The name sent a jolt through her. She recalled the timid yet kind-hearted nurse who had occasionally visited Marcel when she was too busy to be bothered. Sophie, with her soft voice and genuine concern, had been nothing more than an afterthought to Mary. The lawyer handed her a sealed letter. Mr. N instructed that you receive this. With trembling fingers, Mary tore open the envelope. Marcel's familiar handwriting greeted her. My dearest Mary, you thought yourself clever, playing the role of a devoted wife while secretly counting the days until my passing. I admit, for a time, I was blinded by loneliness, believing in your affection. But in my final moments, I saw the truth, the indifference in your eyes, the relief in your sighs when my condition worsened. I once wished to leave you everything, but then I realized you gave me nothing but pretense. So I have returned the favor. Enjoy the life you so desperately tried to secure without a single penny of mine. Marcel Mary's hands shook as the letter slipped from her grasp. A pit formed in her stomach, swallowing her triumph whole. The walls of the lavish mansion she had once dreamed of owning suddenly felt suffocating. Outside, the sound of laughter echoed in the distance. Through the window, she saw Sophie, tearfully accepting the keys to Marcel's estate from the lawyer. The very home Mary had schemed to claim now belonged to a woman who had never expected anything in return. Mary's vision blurred with fury and regret. She had played the game, but in the end, Marcel had played it better, and now she had nothing. Mary sat frozen in the grand study, the weight of her defeat pressing down on her like an iron cage. The mansion, Marcel's mansion, was no longer hers. The life of wealth and luxury she had imagined was slipping away before her very eyes. Outside, Sophie stood in the garden, the autumn breeze tousling her hair as she wiped a tear from her cheek. The nurse hadn't sought riches, but she had earned them nonetheless. Marcel had entrusted everything to her, his estate, his businesses, his fortune, everything that should have been Mary's. Mary clenched her fists. No, this couldn't be happening. The lawyer stood, gathering his papers. You have 24 hours to vacate the premises, Mrs. N. After that, the property legally belongs to Miss Laurent. 24 hours. Mary's mind raced. She had given up everything for this life, her independence, her dignity, even her time. Marcel had been a means to an end, but now he had outplayed her from beyond the grave. She had no savings, no backup plan. If she left this house, she had nowhere to go. As the lawyer exited, Mary's gaze landed on a large oil painting of Marcel above the fireplace. His eyes, once kind and searching, now seemed to mock her. She felt the walls closing in, suffocating her with the truth she refused to accept she had lost. As night fell, Mary wandered through the grand estate one last time. Each chandelier, each marble column, each velvet curtain, she had once envisioned them as her own. But now, she was merely a guest overstaying her welcome. Her thoughts turned bitter. Sophie Laurent, a simple, unremarkable nurse who had done nothing but show kindness, Marcel had chosen her over his own wife. How utterly pathetic. Mary's lip curled. But then a thought slithered into her mind like a serpent. Sophie would be alone in this house soon. Young, naive, vulnerable, Mary's fingers traced the ornate banister as she walked upstairs. The wheels of her mind spun with one final plan. If she couldn't have the fortune, then no one would. At precisely midnight, Mary crept through the darkened halls, her footsteps silent on the polished wood. A single candle flickered in the distant Sophie's room. The girl had likely been too overwhelmed to sleep, still reeling from her unexpected inheritance. Mary's pulse quickened. This was it, a simple accident. A fall down the grand staircase, a misplaced push. An unfortunate ending for dear, sweet Sophie. With slow, deliberate movements, Mary pushed open the door. The room was dimly lit by the moon, casting long shadows across the walls. Sophie sat by the window, wrapped in a silk robe, staring at the gardens below. She didn't even turn. I was wondering when you'd come. Mary froze. Sophie's voice was soft, but there was no fear, only certainty. Slowly, the young woman rose from her chair and faced Mary, her expression unreadable. "You think I don't know why you're here?" she whispered. "You think I don't know what you've done?" Mary's mouth went dry. I don't know what you mean." Sophie took a step forward, her presence strangely commanding. "Marcel knew long before he passed. He saw through you, Mary, and so did I." Mary's heart pounded. The room felt colder, the shadows darker. Sophie tilted her head, her eyes gleaming with something unsettling. "Did you really think you could fool everyone?" Mary took a step back, suddenly desperate to escape the suffocating room. But Sophie took another step closer, then she smiled. And in that moment, something shifted in the air. The candle flickered violently. A deep chill crawled up Mary's spine, and then she heard it. A whisper, faint, familiar, right behind her. "You gave me nothing, so I have returned the favor." Mary gasped and spun around to see nothing but darkness. When she turned back to Sophie, the young woman was still smiling. "You were never going to win, Mary," she whispered. Then the candle blew out and the screaming began. Mary's scream pierced the silence of the estate, but it was swallowed by the thick darkness that now engulfed the room. Her breath came in ragged gasps as she stumbled backward, her hands grasping at empty air. The whisper Marcel's voice had been right behind her. Impossible, he was dead. Barry gone, and yet the air felt heavy, charged with something unnatural. The room had turned ice cold, her skin prickling as if unseen eyes were watching her. "Sophie," she rasped, her voice barely above a whisper. But the young woman was gone. The candle had been extinguished, yet the faintest blue light shimmered in the room, casting eerie shadows along the walls. The whisper came again, this time closer, curling around her ears like a lover's breath. "You thought you could take everything from me, Mary." Mary spun wildly, her heart hammering against her ribs. "This isn't real. This isn't real." She bolted for the door, her hands fumbling against the handle. But as she pulled, it wouldn't budge locked. A cold dread seeped into her bones. She banged against the wood. "Let me out." And then the laughter started. It wasn't Sophie's, it wasn't hers, it was his. A slow, deliberate chuckle that reverberated through the walls, through the very foundation of the house. It oozed amusement and malice. Mary staggered back, shaking her head. "No, no, you're dead." The laughter grew, filling every corner of the room. Shadows stretched unnaturally, twisting along the floor and ceiling, moving in ways they shouldn't. The walls seemed to breathe, the house itself coming alive with Marcel's presence. Then something moved in the mirror across the room. Mary's reflection was no longer her own. Instead, Marcel stood there, his frail, aged form draped in his funeral suit, his skin pale and waxy as if freshly pulled from the grave. His once kind eyes now glowed with an unnatural light. Cold and knowing, he smiled. "Did you miss me, my dear?" Mary let out a strangled gasp and stumbled backward, her heel catching on the rug. She hit the ground hard, the impact rattling through her bones. Marcel's reflection didn't move, but his voice slithered through the air. "You wanted my fortune so desperately. Let's see how you enjoy my legacy instead." The room began to spin. The air thickened, suffocating, pressing against her chest like invisible hands. Mary clawed at her throat, struggling for breath. The shadows moved faster now, whispering, chattering, voices overlapping, greedy, deceiver. Unworthy, Mary squeezed her eyes shut. "Stop it." The moment she shouted, the voices ceased silence. When she opened her eyes, the room was back to normal. The candle was relit, the air was still. And Sophie stood in the doorway, watching her. "You saw him, didn't you?" Sophie's voice was calm, almost sad. Mary couldn't speak. Sophie stepped forward, kneeling beside her. "You thought you could take everything and walk away unpunished, but this house, it belongs to him. His spirit lingers here, watching, waiting." She tilted her head. "You feel it, don't you?" Mary's body trembled. Sophie stood, looking down at her with quiet pity. "You wanted to be part of his wealth." Her lips curled into something almost like a smirk. "Congratulations, Mary, now you're part of his curse." The candle flickered again. The whisper came once more, curling around Mary's ear like a snake. "You gave me nothing, so I have returned the favor." Mary let out a choked sob. The house had claimed her, and it would never let her go.